You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Well, here we are rounding things up on Mission Log Engage with another fantastic listener email. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Norman Lau.
And we are here to engage with you, all of you.
Yeah. And we are here to engage with this wonderful email that has come in from missionlog@roddenberry.com, where you can also send us your comments that we can engage with, just like we're going to do with Mark here.
All right, take it away.
So Mark says, "Dear John and Norm, I love your podcast."
Oh, stop right there.
I know. Perfect. What a great email, right? Shortest engage ever because it's perfect.
Yeah.
It is one of my favorites. I started listening around the time the lockdown started and have done every TNG and DS9 of yours. I've always wanted to write you and give you guys such the biggest compliment to the hard work, great fun, and such tremendous deep insight you always provide. You come up with observations that I could never and am just amazed at. And I was a big fan of Ken's, and now Norm and John, you're just as great. Consistency,
thank you.
John. Consistency. I could go on flowering you guys forever, but to my point, I just listened to episode 410, Sound of Her Voice on Mission Log. With all respect, I disagree with an assumption of both of yours that was a major point that you both make throughout the episode. The crew needs a counselor, and Starfleet has dropped the ball by not giving them access to one, like Enterprise D had Deanna Troi. You cross-reference Season 4, Episode 18, Hard Time, as being the beginning of Miles not having access to a counselor, and that Deep Space Nine didn't have one then and still doesn't have one. Your closing on your episode with the computer even has a cute ending with "Help Wanted, Counselors." Deep Space Nine has Counselor Telnori. We've just never seen him, her, or them. At 1301 of Season 4, Episode 18, Hard Time, Keiko says, "Talking about it with Counselor Telnori should help." I bring this up not to be that listener, but a major focus of your episode and your talk was that Starfleet needs to have counselors available and just doesn't. As far as we know, it is possible that everyone at Deep Space Nine does use Counselor Telnori, just not Miles. Both Deep Space Nine and the Defiant are under the orders of Ben Sisko. As far as we know, there is no crew assigned to the ship. They're all assigned to Deep Space Nine and to use the ship when they need. That would imply they all have access to Counselor Telnori. During the DS9 episode, Sound of Her Voice, no other character that talks to Captain Cusack mentions not having a need for a counselor except for Miles. My opinion is because Miles' character is that stereotypical man's man, everyday guy that doesn't have use for talking about feelings. John, at the end of the podcast, you restate that even Captain Cusack doesn't like counselors. I don't feel she thinks that. I just think that she was trying to reach Miles. He was an easy read to her, and I thought she was trying to get to him to see that what they were doing is exactly what he would be doing with a counselor. Parentheses, she was using reverse psychology on him, like she tricked Julian for not paying attention to her, end parentheses. One side note, it was symbolically funny that Miles was the only one of the three that we saw actually lying down as if he was in a psychiatrist's office while talking to her. Yeah. So I feel there is a counselor for the Starfleet personnel to access at Deep Space Nine. It's my only nitpick over all those wonderful podcasts that Mission Log has done. I absolutely love your podcast. It helps one get through the day, almost like talking to a therapist. Hail Tor Joy, Mark.
Mark, I so appreciate that email, and thank you for the compliments and the good humor contained therein. Look, I honestly, I don't disagree with you. I mean, there's so much that we have to just sort of infer from DS9. You know, it's funny to me that it is this absolutely gargantuan city-sized station, and depending on when we're there, it's either like 300 people on board or several thousand or whatever. We don't know who's coming or going. And the counselor thing, I think absolutely, you know, we're making the indication here that Counselor Telnori does exist. However, you know, you fast forward a bit, and as soon as we get Esri Dax on board Deep Space Nine, Ben Sisko, I forget the exact line, but he says something like, "Well, we don't have a counselor, so how about you?" You know, so apparently there is some lack of availability of counselors. Maybe Telnori was just completely booked up with everybody else. And I do think, yeah, there is certainly, I love the observation that Captain Cusack was just trying to reach Miles. totally makes sense. I appreciate that read. I love the idea of Miles laying down, and that really drives
Yeah,
home
that was
his
great.
need for a
Yeah.
therapist. That
Mhm.
is awesome. But I think the biggest sort of tragedy maybe of Hard Time, and there's a lot of ways to pick apart that episode. It's one of those that, in retrospect, I feel like our conversation, if we had it again, might go a different way. Not that I've completely changed my mind about the episode, but we got a lot of feedback about it, and I might kind of sway one way or the other in talking about it.
Mhm.
Um, I think the tragedy of that episode is that a guy like Miles would be a guy like Miles who feels like he doesn't need therapy, doesn't want it. He's a man's man, blah, blah, blah. You know, however you want to frame it, he's a guy who doesn't talk about his feelings. That is one of those things that I hope that in 300 years, we're not that's not a thing.
Yeah.
Seeing a therapist is as regular as going to the dentist, or as accepted as going to the dentist to get your teeth cleaned, because that's just what you do,
Mhm.
you know? So I think that was the real kind of sticking point.
I think that, in the Star Trek before Deep Space Nine, we always had a counselor of type for the captain, or maybe even for other officers, but definitely for the captain, and that was Spock and Bones. They were like,
Hmm.
they were his counselors for both sides of the equation. For much like the enemy within, you have to have both sides of you have to have pathos and ethos and logos
Hmm.
to work in concert to be like a whole person. And obviously, in the Next Generation, they made it a point, because the captain and the first officer are under so much pressure and so much stress, that maybe the counselor being at the third chair was important, so that these monumental decisions that these lead commanders need to make may need a little bit more guidance than they originally thought, because the Federation is so big. I love that the counselor was represented there on the bridge. But in Deep Space Nine, sometimes you don't have the opportunity of showing, and most of the time it's telling. And sometimes in the telling, it's just lost in the overall tapestry of the entire story. So Council Telnori, probably on one hand, maybe one hand and a half, is mentioned throughout the course of all 7 seasons.
Hmm.
And yes, they do make a very Cisco made a very specific, reference to, Dax being, oh, we finally have a counselor. But I think it's more like we finally have a counselor in our main cast, in our main group.
Right, where we
Right.
actually get to you. Yeah.
Yeah, where the
Yeah.
main cast can interact with an actual counselor, or even Garrick in Ezri's second or third episode. So
Yeah.
it's not that I think we believe that there are no counselors on the station. It's just that they don't. Let me put it this way: in a situation where the situation is very dire, the Dominion War, what's going on the station, the stresses that the offices are under, I think that both John and I may have wanted to see a little bit more proactivity from a counselor type guest star.
Yeah.
That would have been, I think that would have assuaged like a lot of our criticisms of not seeing a counselor on board.
Yeah. And that those were difficult scenes at the end of Hard Time, and you sort of, in a good way and in a bad way, it sort of takes you aback. Like, whoa, how did lovable Miles get to this point?
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody does get to that point, where are the stopgaps along the way that we haven't figured out in 300 years to prevent that kind of thing from happening? So it's a challenging episode no matter what. Brilliantly acted by Colm, and I love the added texture you give us here, Mark. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks for the email, Mark, and we appreciate you listening, and we appreciate all of you out there listening and supporting what we're doing here on this new project, Mission Log Engage. And if you'd like to engage with us, you can always subscribe here to our YouTube channel at Roddenberry Entertainment, and subscribe to this playlist at Mission Log Engage. And you can also send us your comments always at missionlog@roddenberry.com. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Mission Log. And remember, we may use your comments and engage with them on the air.